The first 3 weeks of the eruption here in Hawaii, crazy things would happen in the middle of the night. A new fissure would open up and it would threaten a new neighborhood. Thousands of people were evacuated from their homes. I started the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to help people understand what's going on and get their questions answered.
Hey, how's it going? We're live. This is Fissure 20.
We had hundreds of people all throughout the neighborhoods sending in videos, articles, and images. We spend a lot of time making sure the accurate information gets out.
This is live. Still lava moving.
They weren't just sharing a story, they were helping their neighbor. If a family was being evacuated, a group would just jump in and help out. So it was huge. They were watching out for each other.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you for the support from everybody.
As we go through this, we're growing closer together as a community. When tragedies like this strike, you really realize how much you need each other.
Aloha everyone, I am geologist Philip Ong, here with Mr. Dane DuPont from HVERI, the Hawaiian Volcano Education and Resilience Institute. We are joined today by our ASL interpreters. Mahalo, Mr. Daniel Kaufman, and we will also be joined today by Rachel Powell. Thank you, Rachel, for joining us for the first time today. You'll see her a little later. Today is Friday, December 1st, 2023. We are one day off of our regular update schedule on Thursday. We've had a busy week, Dane. Lots going on here at the end of the month. How have you been, man?
Oh, busy, you know. Been watching the volcanoes, but really just trying to stay dry. If we're being honest here, the last few days have been very wet in Puna. Several inches of rain in the last 48 hours where I'm at. So trying just to stay dry, really.
Yeah, and the volcano has been quaking here, quaking there, doing some interesting things. We took a week off for Thanksgiving last week, so I'm sure we'll have lots of questions and chatter in the chat today. So if you have any questions, join our chat there. Dane will be leading a discussion and collecting some questions for us to discuss along the way here. We're going to switch things up a little bit today. We're going to do Mauna Loa first because we actually are at the 1-year anniversary of Mauna Loa's eruption last year. So we will review how Mauna Loa is just still refilling since last year, but check in a little bit, and then turn back to Kilauea and all the earthquakes happening in the summit, in the Southwest Rift area, and more recently in that Upper East Rift area too. So that's our schedule today. We'll go through that. And
one other thing is some people might have noticed we have a little bit of a new H-Very logo that we're using for the first time today. We have that, put some work into that, and I like it. So yeah, just go ahead and share your opinions on that. I see Gary has already mentioned it, and
yeah, that's right. It's our unveiling. Yeah, unveiling.
Right.
Here. We didn't put it up last week when we were off, but yeah, we've been working on this for a while and glad to have it out here. So more coming. Mahalo, Gary, and everyone else.
Right. All right. So yeah, let's go ahead.
All right. So let's rearrange our screen here. And let's show you our Hawaiian Volcano Summary. So the Hawaiian Volcano Summary this week, you're looking at the summit of Mauna Loa this morning, which got a fresh coat of snowfall over last night, along with this weather we've had on the island. By now, it's been out in the sun all day and melted. So I'm showing you the picture from this morning. You can see that Mauna Loa's surface is cool and cold here at the moment, much different than 1 year ago. The story of Mauna Loa is still that it's been refilling since the 22 eruption. This is a GPS measurement across the caldera of Mauna Loa at its summit. And what you're seeing here is this gradually rising line means the sides of the crater are getting further and further apart slowly. The eruption happened, it basically jerked one way open and then sagged closed. And ever since then, it has been recovering and refilling, recharging within its magma reservoirs. It did so more quickly at first in those first few months following the eruption. And as expected, it has slowed over time and slowed and slowed. And here we are, it's still doing it, but it's doing it at a little bit of a slower rate. One thing that can affect this is the interaction of Mauna Loa and Kilauea. So as Kilauea becomes more active now, Mauna Loa may be feeling some of the effects of that ground movement to this on the southwest rift of Kilauea, which is just to the south of Mauna Loa here. So that's the story with what's happening on Mauna Loa. Here is the last 5 years GPS, a similar plot as you just saw, but more current at the right end here, and with a little bit of a data gap, which is why we showed you the other one first. So similar expected pattern on Mauna Loa. On Kilauea, we have earthquakes over the last week along the southwest rift in this area that's immediately south and west of the summit, but also further to the southwest, closer to the 1823 vents towards Pahala, this direction, right there. Also, earthquakes in the Upper East Rift connector that are in this circle right in here. So this is the area of adjustment. It's a little bit of this box just south of the summit. This is the area of the volcano that's trying to move out of the way as it fills from the summit area right up there. And as usual, we have the rest of the volcano adjusting. These other earthquakes are all the other pieces of land trying to move out of the way and adjust to this thing pushing and filling within this triangle up here that is between the summit and the rift zones. Looking at some of the tilt data a little more closely, we've often looked at these two stations, one at the summit at Uekahuna, and this station is showing a net inflation over the last month here. That means the ground is tilting outwards faster from the center. Whereas the station just on the bottom of the screen here is at Sand Hill. And this green line is one we've been looking at as the one that corresponds to the area south of the summit. So we can see that over the last month, this line has moved quite a lot, this green one. This activity has been ongoing now for 2 months since the start of October. So we're missing the first month of it. But you can see that the ground was basically sagging, somewhat flattish, wiggling a little bit. And it really starts swelling right here. That's a pulse that occurred between the 10th and the 15th of this month. It slows again. You see another pulse occurring in 2 phases there more recently. That ends about a week ago. And more recently here, it's been fairly flat and unchanging, relatively speaking, in that area. So the interesting thing is this blue line below corresponds to the summit area, and the green line is south of the summit. And what we've seen is at times the summit swells first, and that area south lags, and then the summit stops, and that area to the south picks up. It stops, and the summit increases, and they seem to be playing this back and forth a little bit. Yeah, it's more complicated than that. But that's an interesting interplay. 2 areas of swelling in a volcano, same pattern as for the last 2 months, and it seems to be taking turns as magma comes into the volcano. It sends a pulse into the summit, pressurizes the summit, flows down through that reservoir system towards the southwest, to the south, maybe into that upper east rift zone as well. And then that pressure decreases at the summit, increases at the flank, the next pulse comes up, and so you see this variation that seems to not be synchronized between the 2 locations. And all this while we still have a station down at Hilinapali, which is 7 miles from the summit, still being pushed very significantly to the south and to the east. So these effects are widespread far from the summit still as well. And we don't quite capture the full picture looking at just the summit stations. So a lot's changing here on Kilauea. I thought I would just wrap it up in our summary here by showing you 2 interferograms. These are satellite images that are measures of the ground distance from the satellite on one day, and then again on the next, maybe a week later, 2 weeks later in this case. And then you look at the difference between the images to see how much the ground has changed. So an image like this, without getting into the fancy details, there's a big bullseye, and the center of activity is the center of the bullseye right here. So this was taken for the first 2 weeks of October, and clearly you can see the center activity here in the southwest of the summit caldera. And just skip ahead to the last 2 weeks we've had here now, where there is the bullseye in the center of the caldera. So we'll flip it back and forth. There's the southwest zone, and then there's a central zone. There are more frames in this we'll show you in our full update. But for now, you can see how the center of swelling has been variable and changing, and the volcano continues to adjust underground. So that is our Hawaiian volcano summary for the week. And with that, we will turn to the Mauna Loa eruption from last year briefly. The USGS has released a science snippet last week reflecting on Mauna Loa's reawakening. So here's what they say. Last year's Hawaiian eruption, which was preceded by months of earthquakes and ground deformation, captured the attention of scientists and people the world over. They note that the eruption began just before midnight on a Sunday. Lava emerged from the summit caldera, triggering a swift response from the USGS and the civil defense. National Park as well was involved, and they note that their initial concerns focused on notifying island of Hawaii residents, particularly those living in Mauna Loa's southwestern slopes, that their community could be impacted. At the same time, on social media, photos and videos of lava flows heightened tensions that an eruption could be dangerous to those living nearby. So that was a crazy night. We, in fact, have a whole playlist on our YouTube channel where you can rewatch that entire sequence of Mauna Loa last year. So if you want to see in more detail, you can relive all 12 days of eruption there. And yeah, we'll come back to that at some point in the future. But what happened that morning was it was apparent early in the morning of the 28th that the lava flows were heading into the northeast rift zone. And that was a welcome notice, because that meant the communities to the southwest were out of harm's way. So they put live streams on YouTube. They did a lot of science. The lava flow went towards the Saddle Road, eventually stalled about 1.7 miles from the highway. And in the end, we were fairly lucky that that was all the effect there was. We had a nice dry run through to test our systems, which may have failed, but gave us a chance to improve them before they're tested again. So that is the update here from the USGS on that recap. They have included an anniversary video. This is a 3-minute video. And so what I'll do is I'll play this for you guys here. And just be quiet for these few minutes while we relive what happened with Mauna Loa here last year. So unless anyone needs to jump in here, I will play the video. Here goes. All right, so that was the USGS video of the anniversary of Mauna Loa's eruption 2022. Put together by Katie Mulliken and shared for you guys here on HVery. So what we'll do now is
can I just have a little comments on that real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
Before we go in there, because just one thing struck out to me on that was like, you know, how could it impact you and your family? And then they're like, make an emergency plan. And that's the hard part is we knew guys that had plans in 2018 And then giant wrenches got thrown into them by things that were completely unexpected. Like, guys that have trailers with all of their belongings ready to be hitched up before the eruption. And then it happens, and by the time they get back, they're not allowed in to go get their belongings, essentially. Right? Just weird things like that it makes it hard, right? And yeah, that's what we're trying to do here is, bring what it's actually like on the ground. That's what we learned the hard way in 2018 is it's not so easy as just say make a plan sometimes, because sometimes it takes, a lot of just knowledge and even experience just to know what to plan for.
For sure. But studies show that only 8% of us on an island actually have an emergency plan. So probably
actually
could do the work here.
Which is actually the same amount of people that have the Everbridge installed. The messaging app from Civil Defense is also at 8%. So not great.
Yeah. So still, make an emergency plan for sure. That's what the bottom line is. Every family and community has to look out for themselves, and we'll have help, but that help may take time to come, and it may not have the knowledge of how to best benefit your community. So it's really up to the neighbors and the community itself. And that starts with your own family and preparing your own plan at home. And unless you can put yourself in a position where you're secure, you won't be able to help anyone else during an emergency as well. So that's where it all starts. And we, of course, care about the full Monty here, right? We want to make sure that all the way through all levels, there is support for our disaster response, right? That's our whole mission of our nonprofit, to support that communication, education, preparedness, and a response, all of it.
Right.
So mahalo for making sure we talk about that, Dane. That's important for sure. Okay, so let's let me find the right button here, and let's put on monitoring for Mauna Loa. So we'll quickly look through Mauna Loa's monitoring signals. Here is the ground tilt at Mauna Loa summit for the last month. And on here, just like on Kilauea, there's two lines. The blue line points towards where the magma normally stays, and the green line is pointing 90 degrees away. Right? So really, you care about the blue line. The little ups and downs are daily variations. Those may have to do with temperature or something along those lines. So what you're really worried about is this overall pattern. So you see it kind of rose up, then coming up, and then maybe coming down here at the very end. Now, the overall pattern is one of inflation, meaning the volcano is adding magma underground, filling up and tilting outwards, with little variations on top of that. It is worth noting that in the last few days here, there has been weather. So we showed you guys a picture of snow on a mountain. And that kind of thing can also affect the signal here. We'll do a switch off just a second.
That I don't know what happened there. That shouldn't have been the time for the switch off. We should have had several more minutes. I'll get it fixed.
So, I'll keep going in that case. All right, so that top plot there is the tilt. The volcano has been swelling with little variations. This one earlier may have been to do with Kilauea's movement and Mauna Loa adjusting in response. That's still a bit murky, but certainly the possibility is there that that could be happening. And as a result of that, about a month ago, we had seen this flurry of earthquakes that had been occurring at depths of 30 to 40 kilometers down. It's about 20 miles, and culminated with a fairly shallow event, which you see here. Didn't quite reach sea level, but compared to the other events, is showing magma movement within the shallower parts of Mauna Loa. So after that happened, you see the deep earthquakes slow down significantly. We've really had none in the last 2 weeks here. The shallow ones have been also occurring, but also slowing down a bit as well. If I scroll down to the earthquake rates, here they are. You can see that earthquake spike from just about a month ago with those deep and shallow earthquakes combined there. and ever since, fairly low values of earthquakes. The peak was at about 35 earthquakes in one day, about a month ago there. Not much compared to Kilauea. So one thing to note is on this graph, you can see there's actually, looks like there's a piece of this red line is missing, and there's not even any blue bars over here. Sometimes you do see days with no earthquakes showing up like this, but it looks like we actually have some data missing in that case here. And if you come up, it's missing right there as well. It is picking up on a tilt, but remember, this is that same period of the storm. So maybe something got knocked offline as far as communicating to the website this information. So looking further back than the last month, this is the last year. So instead of earthquakes per day, now we have earthquakes per week. We can see that last month's event was actually, let's see, it's this peak right up here. Well, no, where is it? This week, 1, 2, 3, 4. So yeah, it's actually back in here in these little ones, which had been higher before. And that doesn't really compare to anything except for about a year ago when we were in the midst of that eruption, just really still adjusting to that initial outbreak of lava from Mauna Loa. And for the last 5 years, all of this is really piddly, very small compared to what we saw building up to the 2022 eruption for the whole 5 years prior to that. So that is what's happening in Mauna Loa. It's much of the same, but we thought we'd go a little extra there. As we mentioned before, the USGS made this plot from 2 different stations that are plotted on the website. First, to get a nice data view of that recovery process since the 2022 eruption right here. So this is the expected pattern. Here is what we saw after eruptions in 1975, right there, and 84, which is right there. So these blue lines are the equivalent of those measurements. And so you see it jumps up, and then it slows down a bit. That's the pattern we see now. Eruption 84, it jumped up, came down, and rounded over. And in that case, it wiggled up, came up some more. This went on for, let's see, this year right here is about 1994. So perhaps 10 years of it, in that case, recharging and refilling and stretching out. Now, it's worth noting that this eruption in Mauna Loa had one of the longer intervals, right? It was 38 years since 84 to 2022. So we're not sure that it'll follow the same pattern unless it really stays slow for that long again. And one last thing here. We've shown this cycle before from a paper by Walter and Amelung about how there's an interaction of, they put it out as earthquakes and eruptions, but I'll generalize. Instead of earthquake, I will say ground movement, right? So panel A, the ground is moving on the flank of the volcano. That leads to a stress change that basically means less pressure. And then the magma can decompress and sag, right? So when that happens, the volcano, the top of the volcano can show that little deflation signal. You might see, yeah, that kind of thing, the earthquakes moving within that system right there. As if there's space in a rift zone, the magma maybe can rise within that system, right? That's what you're seeing here is a triggering panel C. And then they say that that would lead to, in that case, in the most extreme case, dike intrusion and eruption, right? So I'll cross off the and eruption for this case since I'm drawing on the screen. And what really matters is the volcano filling, right? So as a volcano fills, it pushes against its edges. That then causes the ground to want to move again. So you have a cycle of the ground moving out of the way, making space on the inside for the magma to rise, the summit to sag. That then, if it were to progress far enough, could lead to an eruption. But if it doesn't, it's just an intrusion, which pushes on the side, and there you have it again. And the reason this matters now is that not only do you have the actual pressure of magma pushing on the side of the mountain. On top of Mauna Loa, there is Kilauea as well over here. And it has its own southwest rift, which is filling, and it's also moving this flank of the volcano. So it's a little more complicated than this, but that's more or less what's happening in Mauna Loa. It's been happening before this eruption. The cycle of it fills, and it sprawls, and it fills, and it sprawls. And if it can't sprawl fast enough, then it pops out the top and erupts. Right? So here we are back to the filling and sprawling, and it doesn't look like it's going to pop open anytime imminently, but it is filling. So someday, sooner or later, that will be the case. And we'll stop with Mauna Loa there and switch to Kilauea, and we can switch off now, perhaps.
All right.
Okay. So let's turn to Kilauea, and we'll look at Kilauea's earthquakes to start. Could call it Mauna Loa's too, but as you can see from the map, there are not a whole lot of earthquakes in Mauna Loa. Right? We do see a settling event here in the southwest, one on Mauna Kea to the north, and there is one on Mauna Loa here on its east flank, right there. That's a 1.9, 3 miles down, and if you notice, right between there and the southwest rift area of earthquakes. So not a surprise to see this area in between having to adjust to that movement. On Kilauea, this is earthquakes for the last week, and these are colored by time. And you see that there are still earthquakes ongoing in this part of the southwest rift between the summit and the Kauai fault zone. That's right here. We've pointed out this triangle before. And it does appear that this upper east rift cluster is still ongoing. It's slower than it was last week and a half ago or so, but still ongoing here. Worth pointing out. And finally, the earthquakes happening way down by the 1823 vents these are not the Dipahala earthquakes, but there's a 1.6 mile down, 2.3 right there. These are also still ongoing. Right? So there are all of our areas of activity that we're looking at today. There, and there. Those are the three main ones. Okay, so with that, we'll just look at the earthquake map for the past week here, where these are all colored by depth. And one thing I wanted to point out is that this area of the Kauai fault zone, this triangle, as we say, has lots of internal cracks that all run in this direction, like this. And we know that these pathways have been used by magma in the past, right? So considering the earthquake activity in the upper East Rift connector, as it's sometimes called here, it certainly seems possible, given how long this is now ongoing, how persistent it is, that magma may have worked its way through one of these cracks over to this part of the upper East Rift zone to cause all this cracking and surface adjustment, right? To the point where the national park, under the advice of the USGS, actually closed the Chain of Craters Road on the 21st of November in the national park because this activity was so intense. It seemed possible that it might erupt at the surface on the Chain of Craters Road that day. As we've seen, the magma pressure has come in pulses, it waxes and it wanes. So it turned out that after one day of activity of being really intense in that area, it slowed down and they reopened the road the next day, in fact. But that is a signal of how concerned the park is and how proactive they're being towards making sure that people who are driving in that area are not going to be suddenly faced with lava and trapped in one side or the other. So that is the earthquakes themselves. We'll touch back on this as we go through the rest of the monitoring signals, but let's look in more detail at those. And to start off with, we'll just look at some of the USGS text updates. And as I mentioned, the 21st was an exciting day. So to point that out here, on the 21st, We'll highlight a few clips of this update. Let's see here. They say unrest increased the morning of November 21st in the south part of the caldera, followed by a cluster of earthquakes around 8 a.m. in the upper East Rift Zone. They note 45 earthquakes in the southern part of the caldera, which included 2.8, actually two 2.8 earthquakes. And along with that, 25 earthquakes in the upper East Rift Zone. The largest earthquakes on the 21st were 3.2 and 2.8, and these were between Puhimau and Hi'iaka craters. That is most of it there. They do say there was no sign of an imminent eruption, but increased seismicity around the summit and upper East Rift Zones are similar to events before other eruptions. So on that day, they actually state the most likely location for renewed eruptive activity is within the caldera, but it is also possible that an eruption could occur in the upper East Rift Zone. So you see, this is the language that prompted the park to close their road. Right there. They also note it is also possible that the activity may subside and no eruption will occur. So there you have it. That's the same wide range of possibility we've been laying out for 2 months now, because this is really a dynamic situation. And ultimately, we just don't know how much space there is down there before it pressurizes to pop up, and how localized that pressure might be. Right? We're not expecting a long-lasting, years-long eruption from these areas. It would be something probably fairly short and quick to relieve that localized pressure. And that would be the pattern we've seen in this area from eruptions in the past. That Kauai fault zone very rarely erupts, and when it does, it's usually a very small volume. And likewise for that Upper East Rift connector as well. So we'll wait and see. So this was the 21st. The next day, as we mentioned, they did state that activity had returned back to normal. It slowly subsided throughout the remainder of the day. What else shall I highlight here for you guys? They still say an increase in seismic unrest would be expected prior to any activity in this region. Strong swarms 1 to 2 hours before eruptions are typical, and those have not been detected. So that was the 22nd. They back off, and rather than go through every single on and off and on and off, I'll just jump ahead to today's update, December 1st, where they note low levels of seismicity continue. That's basically it. There's really not much else to highlight in here. Just bringing you current that we're back to everything is more or less normal now. They do note in their rift zone observations recently, we continue to closely monitor both rift zones, especially near the summit. No unusual activity has been noted along the middle and lower east rift zones. That's what matters there. That's where people are, is the middle and lower east rift zones, and no activity happening over there. So at the moment, no increased threat to people. Everything is still, we're just still waiting to see what will happen within a national park. So let's look at some of the signals. Here are earthquake counts for the last week. This first set of graphs will be all from this last week. And within the last week, the highest day of activity was about a week ago over the weekend here. This looks low, but this is just artificial. If you look at this plot below that shows depth versus the last week of time, you see continuous earthquakes were happening about a week ago, then a little bit of a gap, and really it slows down through here, right? Even though we have this extra flurry, it's not nearly as dense and intense as we see it over here. So still happening a little bit right now, still at the very right end of this graph. That's right now, present time on the 1st. And most of these are happening at these shallow regions, as you can see, rather than the deeper Pahala zone in blue over here. As we pointed out, this tilt for the last week has been all positive, swelling at Halemaumau at the summit. And we've seen this map, so I'll just keep moving past it here to look at the last month time frame. So over the last month, here is the spike on the 21st that caused concern in the upper East Rift Zone, which dropped off.
Oh, did we just lose Phil? He's doing a pose, and yeah, that's the pose, Dano. Yep, that's the pose, and he is not here right now. So yeah, I'd like to invite everybody to come on over to HVERI, the Hawaiian Volcano Education and Resilience Institute. Let's see if we can get a banner for that. We have one of those banners. Well, we have the donate banner. We do take donations if you do enjoy this type of educational content. Take this time when Philip is frozen to go ahead and pitch to you our donation page. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, which means that donations are tax deductible. We take those donations as in Super Chat, but also as well as on our website, which is listed there for you. Hey Lou, how you doing? Welcome to the show.
I am good. How are you doing?
Well, we lost Phil.
I see that.
Hopefully he'll be back here momentarily.
Yep. We've been experiencing this Mauna Loa even at our house just down the slope from Phil. It's been off and on for the last 72 hours. So, and that's just part of it. But I was looking up through the chat and I talked about it. I dropped it and I pulled this up. This is the awareness and preparedness handbook that Hawaii offers from Hawaiian Electric. So we're talking about Phil brought it up about being prepared. Your power goes out, you're stuck out there. It's important here. It's important everywhere. It's really important here.
Yeah. Let's see. Oh, Phil lost power. No quick fix.
He lost power.
All right. So we'll keep it going for a minute at least.
Let's do that.
Keep it going for a bit. Got to come up with something kind of on the fly here. So one of the things, let's talk about that, the preparedness thing a little bit more. I don't really have the easy ability to present much right now either, because I just don't have anything lined up, and it takes a minute to do that with our platform. But one of the things that happened in 2018, if you've been around for a while, you've heard, is that we had the community response was really where everything came together and a lot of work got put in, and that filled the void that was created through the government, and just people have a weird expectations of what the government's capable or is going to do in a disaster. And usually you find yourself, and even if you ask civil defense, they'll tell you that you're usually, especially in the beginning of a disaster, on your own type of thing. If somebody can come help you, great, but usually you're going to have to be self-reliant when facilities are down and services are out, things along those lines, especially in the early stages of like a sudden onset disaster. But even the predictable disasters, they don't know where it's going to hit. Sometimes at night they hit, roads get cut off, you can't get emergency services in. So yeah, it gets difficult to have that type of a resilient basically community, right, where everybody's resilient on their own.
Right. We look at awareness and preparedness in a way of, we make sure that we are set up as best as we possibly can to take care of ourselves first. And then if the county, if the community, if anybody else can help on the back end, that's great. Look, we all just froze up a little bit there.
Yeah, I did. I saw all you guys. Yeah, I saw all you guys go. I was like, don't tell me I'm on my own.
Yeah. We really focus on making sure everything's set up for us in case there's no extra support out there, because it's possible that support's 6 or 12 or 18 hours away. And you brought it up where everybody or a lot of people were prepared in 2018, but they may have been in Honuka or Waimea or Kona or even Hilo and couldn't get home.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that the one of the big ones we saw was just, you know, roads being blocked. And this was one of the things I was telling people is that if the lava comes and it's going to, like, you know, take your house type of thing, from what we saw in 2018, it's not going to be the lava that prevents you from getting back to your place. It'll be the authorities 2 days beforehand that prevent that from happening. So your plans should take that into account, that you're not waiting for the lava, you're waiting for the authorities to restrict access into the area. And
yeah. Uh-oh. Looks like it's just me and Dano and Rachel. Oh, you're back.
There we go.
All kinds of surprises.
There we go.
Oh, we're switching Dano out.
The shuffling with Phil gone, it kind of screws up the whole who's in what number position
right
that we have going on.
Right. And, you know, if you want to touch a little bit on while we're waiting for Philip to get back in here, I can talk about, I saw a release from the National Park Service for up there at Kilauea that they are changing their card system. So it's single signatures coming up instead of dual. Everything is still active with your card if it's, you know, you're still within that year, but they'll be making that change. It's cashless at the gate. And there is a QR code if you go in after hours. Just because nobody's at the gate, they still would like you to scan that QR code, go to the visitor center if you don't have internet access, even if it's at 11 o'clock at night, and help support the park, because it's important.
Yep. I mean, we've seen how everything's gotten more expensive in the past few years, but yeah, that is the thing.
Yep.
Yeah. But what I was going to go with the preparedness stuff, right? So like to talk about that more is the, so really what we had in 2018 was the Puhonua Puna, the hub, and then Hawaii Tractor, which was the physical side of things at the hub, and then the digital more side of things with Kaika Marzo doing everything, you know, being an entity unto himself. Sorry, ASL interpreter, to have to interpret that, but yeah, but we learned a lot just from having to do the community response and how to crowdsource essentially support for things like evacuations, gathering donations, distributing donations. So one of the main things we ran into in 2018 was it was really hard to do things ad hoc on the fly without any preparation, just without any pre-established networks, without 501c3s already set up and established to be able to move money through to get to the people that need it, things along those lines. It was very difficult, and we've been working with county a lot more, so we're now like partners with civil defense. When Mauna Loa went off a year ago, right, you were talking early that at night, and then a few hours after, by the time you guys were out streaming for a little while, we had the mayor, we had the head of USGS HVO and the head of civil defense, you know, sit down with us and go over what's happening. And that was really about the crux of things too, when we were trying to figure out, is it going into the rift zones or not? And I think that when we did that, it was just as we're starting to figure out, like, it looks like it's going north, right? The earthquakes, and it was popping up over there. It happened pretty rapidly, right? And that's one of the real concerns with the Mauna Loa, is that it's a window that's open, right? When we say like, oh, we're in yellow plus, the window's open for an eruption to happen. And we saw how it could happen relatively quickly. We're talking an hour, half hour worth of earthquakes, and then it's at the surface. And then when it transitioned in the rift zone, it was the same way, right? It was like, oh, we got a few earthquakes. Oh, it's on the surface, right? It's like, all right, so we know how it operates, but we still can't get that exact timing right. And this what makes it, you know, hard for communities as well, because it can that window can be open for a while, right? And then all of a sudden it slams shut and it's time, right? And then if it comes towards you, and you're on that southwest rift zone where the ground is steep and the slopes are more significant than on Kilauea. That lava will be moving at roughly 10 miles an hour on the front lobe, which is significantly faster than we saw in 2018. Like not even worth comparing the speed
not
of
even
those.
close. Yeah, Mauna Loa really worked out to be the ultimate practice scenario.
Yep.
Now that we look back at it, of course, we didn't think that in the middle of it all, or at least the first 48 hours of it, 72 hours. You guys were just nonstop. We all were. We were all nonstop. Of course, Anna and I were up top, but you guys are behind the scenes talking to everybody, trying to deal in the mitigation route, get everybody off the highway. And everything was moving so fast.
Some military pilot decides that it's a good idea to break the sound barrier near the island while Mauna Loa is going off and freaks out half the island. So I have to get on the horn with the, Puakaloa training area and figure out, like, can you guys issue a statement to say that it wasn't Mauna Loa, it wasn't you, it was military, but you don't know anything more than that? Can we get that? Because, like, people were like, it's about to blow. It's like, no, that was a sonic boom, guys. It was probably an F-22 offshore doing a training run, and just pilot got a little antsy or something. But yeah. Hey, it looks like we have Phil back.
Hey, welcome back.
All right, so I'm going to add him back to the stage. Thanks for jumping in, Lou. Appreciate it. That's Lou from Two Pineapples. He does live streaming Monday to Thursday at 9 a.m. Going to go over the latest updates and things like that. And they also have the 22.6 channel or 22.6, right?
Close
for
enough.
The somewhere in there, some amount of hours, some amount of days that the thing is actually operational. Yep. It has all the seismographs and stuff like that. So if you want to keep up on monitoring and get a little Christmas music, that's the place to go.
Some Christmas music. All right. Laters.
All right. Take care. Oh, there we go. Swapperoos. All right. Welcome back, Phil. We were just talking a little bit of Mauna Loa.
Can you hear
stuff.
me?
Yes, we can. All right.
Okay, yeah. Sorry about that, you guys. Looked like that extra rain.
Can you reset your camera real quick? There's a bit of a stream delay that might be able to rectify real quick before we get going again.
I'm having issues with my system. I'm not sure. Let's try
okay.
it. Okay.
Yeah, that got it.
Help at all?
Yeah, it did.
All right.
All right. Well, we're back at it.
All right. Thanks for asking for donations. Looks like we got some donations on the screen here. Let me get back to where I was before as well, too. So that would be here. All right. So we were talking Kilauea's monitoring signals, looking at the earthquakes, mentioning how we had that first spike last week. And there actually was a second spike as well, but that one did not cause the same level of alarm and concern as that first one did. No park closures, anything like that. So both of those were higher than any activity over the last month. As I mentioned before, that beginning of October activity is not on this graph, and that would have been about the level as you're seeing here as well. Looking at the plot for depth versus the last month of time, there you see these much thicker, dense bands of shallow earthquakes compared to some of the times within the last month here. Let's see. I think as I'm looking, I realize that we have, let me switch our screen back over. So that thing's big. You guys may have a chance to see it. Right there is that first bump, second bump. And here is, I can zoom it in even more, perhaps. Try. Where you see those really thick bands of shallow earthquakes coming in. Right. All right. So we covered the tilt, how the summit has that inflation source at Hale Ma'u, shown by this Wikahuna component. And it also has that southwest of the summit component shown at Sand Hill by the green line here. Right, and how they're moving a little bit opposite. There are times where you see both lines inflating at the same time, right? Remember, this is the same time frame, so it corresponds exactly 1-to-1, top to bottom. Yeah, so there are some times where you see them both inflating at the same time, and other times where you see one of them not as much and the other one is still going. And that's the interesting thing about right now. And we have seen this before. We saw this back at the earlier part of the month here, where we can see that actually we had much stronger inflation at Hale and flatlining down to the south. So you see it's really ping-ponging back and forth, right? And I imagine that one of those Looney Tunes cartoons where they have that hose of water and you turn the hose on and this big lump moves through the hose and pops out the other end, something like that. So you have these lumps of magma moving through the pipes through the volcano, pressurizing the summit first, and sweeping to the south, filling in those cracks, maybe wiggling into that upper east rift area, then moving further to the southwest, earthquaking down there as well. And as that slug is moving further and further away from the summit, another one pops up. So they seem to be just coming in pulses, as we've said before. So, and we'll look at the INSAR once again here. Just to point out, there is nothing happening on the East Rift Zone. I meant to put on the pool tilt on here, but I'll pull it up separately. Just to show you guys that there's really nothing going on. There is a little bit of funny rain signal. Let me show you the tilt now. Let's get the tilt up here. And come down to, we've seen Uekahuna, we've seen Sandhill. Our Kilauea Iki station is back online, but it shows a very similar pattern as Uekahuna. At the bottom and top panels right here are very similar as far as their patterns, up, down, up, right? Up, down, up, like that. Of the other ones that are online, we have the Escape Road, which is actually showing inflation from both its components, both from the summit area and from the upper East Rift Zone area. Both of those seem to be tilting at the station. Of our Pu'o'o stations, the one that's back online and now has been cleared of noise that happened more than 1 month ago, we are seeing deflation at Pu'o'o Crater here, with the exception of this very last spike at the right end, and that is a classic rainfall signal right there, showing how sensitive these instruments are to the weight of the water collecting on the ground. So that's what we'll show you here. Let me pull it back to the 1 month period. And we only have one measurement of SO2 this month. It looks like it was 96 exactly, because there's only one data point, and this graph happens to scale itself so everything is exactly centered. So we happen to have a scale from 102 to 90, which is really probably about the error of this measurement. So if you could see this in the full year scale, as we show you below, it's basically a 0. Right? There's very little gas coming out of the volcano, but it is enough to cause localized effects for the nearby communities and to change the ground appearance a little bit. We'll look at that here shortly as well. So the whole last month of activity on the map looks like this. A whole lot more circles on here, showing the extent of adjustment over the last month. And one thing I wanted to point out is, because these earthquakes down in this area over here are also still so persistent, just like the ones up here, it does seem quite possible that it's not just the south flank moving and adjusting out of the way in a one-time burst, but rather that magma actually has found one of these cracks and is moving through there and is also building up pressure in this area over here. So if that's the case, then we really have this, we have magma possibly all the way from here up into there and over to this way and over here as well. It could be quite a large system and quite long. And in that case, it really could be filling different parts of it for quite some time before it finds enough pressure to burst to the surface. And so that's really the interesting thing. And this is just the areas that are quaking. We've seen from satellites that maybe it's more broad this area of inflation southwest of Kilauea, right there. So we'll look at the mounts here next, but just to finish running through our graphs, here is the SO2, the gas emissions for the last year, and here is our 0 point. Compared to, for example, when the eruption began in September, we reached 200,000 tons of SO2 per day. So relatively speaking, where we are, about 100 tons per day is not that much for the volcano. If it were a factory, the EPA could come and fine it because that exceeds the industrial standards. So it's still a lot of gas, too much for people to be that close. But what can you do? It's a natural event. All right, I'll take a quick pause here and scroll my screen. And we'll look at the last year a little further. Next, in earthquake counts. So here is this most recent event, but we now can go back to October and see that the earthquakes per week in October actually exceeded the counts that we've seen this past week here. Still pretty high. And what's interesting, rather than just looking at the peaks of these, and is to me is more the duration of it. See how long this thing has lasted here. Is longer for sure than the eruption in September's buildup, than the one in June's buildup as well, even one in January's buildup. All those had shorter time frames, right? And maybe here is where I'll switch over to this other plot that I pulled out of a talk right there from the USGS, where they've actually plotted out the last 4 years of Kilauea's earthquake and tilt together. So this upper plot right here, that's the earthquakes. And we were just looking at basically these little black lines. I know it's a little blurry. I don't have a better resolution than this at the moment. But there is that buildup in September. I'm sorry, September, it's hard to tell. Might be September, June, December here to January, right? And then back to 2021, similar patterns. And really the only one that has quite a long extended buildup is the first one back in December 2020. And this is what followed the 2018 collapse of Kilauea caldera and the refilling of that collapsed structure and rubble with magma coming from below that has since led to these 5 eruptions. So when you have extra room to fill and adjust, that's when you can sustain these levels of earthquakes for longer, right? And so it's not quite clear. It hasn't been long enough yet, but the pattern is just different, right? And the pattern, the locations are different. And so it just feels different, to me at least, that what's happening now is not quite the same pattern as what we saw in June and in September and in June and in January, right? Where it has the potential to drag on these high levels of earthquakes for longer, more similar to this dynamic, right? The reason being that when a magma came back into the volcano, it's been refilling the center of the caldera. And now it's able to pressurize and spread that effect further away. And the next closest thing are both of the upper rift zones, right? The East Rift Connector and the Southwest Rift Connector. So interesting things to note there. At the same time, the tilt for the last 4 months is down here, right? And you see there's this little blip every time there's an eruption. But the overall pattern has been increasing tilt and increasing tilt even faster this year, 2023. So we'll see, right? It looks like the amount of magma coming in is robust, very healthy, lots of magma coming in, no sign of it stopping. And that's likely what all those earthquakes deep in Pahala have meant for the last few years, as the magma supply is healthy, keeps pumping in. And we're seeing the effects on the surface more and more and more. So as before, the question then becomes, how fast can it stretch compared to how it's filling? And this was the same story we had with Mauna Loa in the whole buildup to 2022, right? Because we really had 5 years of elevated earthquakes on Mauna Loa, right? And it was because it was able to fill and stretch and fill and stretch and fill and stretch. And it did that so many times until finally in 2022, it couldn't anymore and that's when it erupted. So we'll see how much she can fill and stretch. I was just joking with somebody today. It's almost like pregnancy pants or something, right? It's like the pants they just keep stretching and just keep stretching and it just keeps stretching. At some point, can they not stretch anymore? And there's no way to know when it's actually gonna erupt. So there's that plot, and I do want to mention the GPS here. Here's a summit GPS for the last year on Kilauea, where for every one of those other eruptions, you can see that the sides are getting further apart. They're spreading. This line is increasing. Every eruption has a little bit of an adjustment, like there in June and there in September. But what's happened over the last few months since October is it hasn't been expanding quite as much. Very slowly with a little bit of an attempt here, but then it actually sags again. This is maybe one of those pulses moving through. Until more recently, where we are right now, it does seem to have resumed that expanding trend, right? So that's the interplay. Can it fill more at the summit? Can it fill more in a rift? How many cracks can it find? Where do those cracks connect to the upper east rift? How far do they go? How far is the blockage since 2018? And the only way to know the answers to all those questions is to watch it recover. And as it recovers, where does it pressurize and where does it quake and where does it show signs of adjusting the most? And that's why I like looking at the 2-year GPS. It's Google Earth to get that kind of that overall pattern. Just to mention here on the East Rift Zone, the sides are contracting and coming together. So no change over there, right? The 2-year GPS, let's look at it here. So that last plot was 1 year. These are now for 2 years. And there are 3 panels because there are 3 components plotted separately. This is the east and west at the top, the north and south in the middle, and the up and down on the bottom. And so this is the whole last 2 years. And what we're looking for to shortcut hack the whole procedure here is what's moving up in particular, right? So this bottom panel of all of them. And up at Wikahuna, the ground has been rising before the last eruption, dropped down, rose again following it, and is still rising, but at a slower rate over here. Mm-hmm. Similar story to the east at Byron's Ledge. If we move to the southwest, though, and we look at that component of up, this is the outlet station, up component. This was the start of October, where it starts shooting up very quickly, slows down, still moving upwards, and then here it is in the last month, picking up, still shooting up pretty quickly. So let's look at this more closely. That's the bottom of that peak, and the top is maybe not quite to the top of the line here. So we're moving from, it looks like, I would call it maybe 0.07, and the top might be 0.33 or something like that, right? So call it 0.32 to make it easy, because that makes it 25 centimeters of uplift in 2 months out here. That's a huge amount, 25 centimeters. What's that in inches, Dane? You know? Yeah, I can figure it out too.
We
25 centimeters, 10 inches.
Yeah, almost 10.
So rising really fast. And while we see the same pattern in other panels here where the ground is also rising fast, the magnitude, the amount of inches it's risen is the highest in this area of the outlet. So here's Crater Rim, that's further to the east. It's also moving up, not nearly as fast, although still pretty fast. And it is quite a lot. That's 0.35. And down here is 0.12. So you're looking at, maybe 20-ish centimeters, a little less. Not quite at the bullseye, that's over here, but close to the bullseye, in fact, as well. And so as we move further over, I'll highlight some other stations. Ahua on the south flank, also rising very fast, right? We can also look at things like, well, it's moving to the south, and it's moving to the east. So it's rising and being pushed to the southeast. At Puhima, which is up right in that upper east rift area with all the earthquakes, it's also rising, but look, it's not rising that fast. It doesn't look like the outlet. Right? So if you're wondering, will the upper east rift really erupt? It's not looking too convincing to me based on this right here compared to what the outlet looks like right there. Right? So there, that's the other station. We don't see it quite as much as far as Devil's Throat, but it is starting to show some effect now as well, where the propagation of the swelling is moving further and further away from the summit and maybe picking up down at Devil's Throat as well. Right, so I won't go into all every single station here. I'll highlight some of the other ones. One we've looked at for a while is Hilinapali, being pushed to the east very fast, being pushed to the south very fast. So really being pushed to the southeast very fast, and actually showing a little bit of a rise, very subtle here, very subtle rise coming in, and not a huge magnitude, right? That you're looking at 1 centimeter more or less, something like that. And to be complete, the Elemakule, the Kule station, which also came back online recently, also being pushed south. And look at this east up here. Suddenly it's really getting pushed to the east, all the way at Elemakule. Right? Not really rising so much, but being pushed to the southeast. And the reason why it's not surprising that it's not rising is, let me show you the map of Google Earth and show you where this is. So here's Kilauea caldera. And let's see how much I can zoom out to keep it visible. This station right here is Mane. No, that didn't work. Okay, it's back. Mane station. So it's being pushed east and south and rising a little bit there. Further down, Hilinapali, that we've said is being pushed south and east and rising up as well. And Elemakule is all the way down here at the coastline. And that's the one that's now getting pushed to the east and to the south as well. So if this is getting pushed southeast, it's being pushed from this area. And that's where the earthquakes are, near the surface by that 1823 event area. So that's more evidence that this is actually getting pushed by injection of magma further over, that you can actually see effects all the way to the coastline, right? It could be that the whole fault block is moving together as well. But for it to keep moving for that long, that persistently, that's one of the differences between patterns of earthquakes that are caused by volcanic injection and by fault movement. Is usually a fault movement, you have a big event and an exponential decrease in the amount of events of aftershocks. With volcanoes, they start and keep going and just keep going at that same level, and then the aftershocks never wind down. It just stays at that same level until the whole event finally pulses out. So it's been a while now. It's been a month of these happening out here. And so that's why it seems likely to me that there's something happening underground with magma injection fairly passively, honestly, right? Because there are earthquakes here and there are earthquakes over here. And we can see from Google Earth that there are big cracks right here. You can see them from space. And somehow between these two areas, no earthquakes. So perhaps using one of these cracks to move over that way, right? And while we are on Google Earth, here is the upper east rift, and there are these other cracks moving in this direction, there, and there. Right? Along with, notably, the south rim of Kilauea's great caldera, as we call it, that outermost caldera of collapse. This is visible in some places. You see here's a lava flow that was flowing downhill and hit a cliff and piled up. That's the edge of the cliff right there. And not far from there is where we see this adjustment, right, where all these earthquakes are occurring. So that's why maybe that's as far as down here, the injection of magma All right, let's move on from Google Earth. I know I got slowed down earlier by my disconnect. Let's see if I can wrap it up here for you guys. All right, so we did the GPS. Let's move on to a couple of visuals. Let me find the right tag here. Our observations, which in this case are from our friend at Cosme64833127, who is using Copernicus and Sentinel-2 imagery. Then this is looking in at that lava lake crust of Kilauea. So let's see if I can zoom this in a little more for the purposes of you guys. And what you're seeing is that white mineral that's likely gypsum and maybe some other sulfates as well, collecting on that crust of the ground of Kilauea's lava lake. And what's happening is the gases are leaking out through the cracks in the crust there. And in the gas, under pressure underground, you have the sulfur is in gaseous form underground, and it's coming out, and then it's decompressing and precipitating those minerals on the surface where it meets the atmosphere. So that's what you're looking at there, is a progression over time of this mineral. I don't know what you call it, right? Some people would call it like a scum or something, right? But this accumulation of gypsum and other sulfates on the ground, just showing the degassing of the volcano accumulating on the ground here. Because this is a little hard to see, I happened to be walking near there last week. So here is a photograph I took from near Waldron's Ledge of what that looks like to the eye right now. And so from Waldron's Ledge, you don't see the most recent eruption site. That's this little puff of gas right below there. That's on the downdrop block and all that we saw in September. So back behind all that old lava lake is what you see back here. And all that white stuff there is all the mineralization. And a couple weeks ago, we showed a S1 time lapse of this process as well. And we'll come back to this in the future again. So quiet on Kilauea surface. You see changes visually with this extra precipitation of mineral, but otherwise all the action is on the instruments underground. Okay, and to finish off Kilauea here, our normal presentation, we often emphasize the volcanic hazards using the VOG measurement and prediction project out of University of Hawaii Manoa. They use the amount of gas coming out of the volcano. Oops, wrong button. They use the amount of gas coming out of the volcano combined with the weather data to then forecast where that VOG might blow. So the forecast for the next couple of days here, because there's so little gas coming out, it's very localized to the volcano area. And you see it does sweep through in some areas here. But overall, looking at good gas conditions volcanically for that island. This is a time to prepare if this activity does lead to an eruption. That is when a gas gets really, really bad, really, really fast. We mentioned in September, it reached 200,000 tons per day. So that is the day you need to be prepared for. So if you happen to be someone sensitive to these gases, now is a time to make sure you have good seals around your windows and doors, filtration systems, gas masks if you might need them, whatever that is. Now is the time to worry about that, because if it does pop out of the ground, it's going to be immediately swamped with gas and you'll have to take shelter immediately. Yes,
and since you mentioned it, might as well just throw out a little mask knowledge. The N95 mask, those are particulate masks. They help with the Pele's hair and the small particulates in the air. They're not going to do a thing for you against the SO2. For those, you need a half face or full face respirator with those, the 6000 series filters from 3M. It needs to be a big boy mask, not the little, disposable masks. Those aren't going to cut it when you get into the SO2 at any kinds of parts per million, which we did hear were, really high in certain areas like Kenikikoi when they closed that area down. We were thinking like, oh, maybe those readings were of the plume itself, and they're saying no, that was more the edge of Kenikikoi, the actual reading on the ground. It just happened to be touching the plume, basically. So if they had a 30 ppm reading there, which is incredibly high, right? In 2018, it was like time to leave when it gets over basically 1 to 2 ppm, right? That's 2 is really when it starts to become uncomfortable type of thing. So yeah, just throwing that out there to get the right mask, do a little research, check online, and just make sure you have the right equipment when, if you're in one of those downwind areas and you're thinking like, oh, I'm going to be prepared, you might just, need the right equipment.
Right. And a lot of those masks have cartridges that you can buy different kinds of cartridges. So there often are ones for gardening, for example. But what you want is for the cartridge to say SO2 on it. That's what matters. That's the key thing to look for in your research. Your cartridge should say SO2. So yeah, preparedness is great. All right, so that's all the current data. There is a Kilauea focused volcano watch this week, which is interesting to discuss briefly here. Let's pull that up for you guys. Here, where is my volcano watch? There it is. It is entitled Explosive Eruptions from Kilauea, Beneficial or Dangerous, depending on location. So it's not quite clear what they mean from the title. I wasn't quite clear until I read through the article. And what they're referring to is the era of recorded history of explosions of Kilauea are known to have impacted the group of warriors of Kīlauea in this area northwest of the summit as he was traveling to engage Kamehameha in battle. Right? So that eruption in 1790 was the one that killed many Hawaiian warriors and family members, and was really culturally significant that the volcano spirits would choose a side. I'll put it like that. So if you're nearby, big explosions can be really bad, deadly. Right? The estimates range from as few as 80 people to, I think I've seen 8,000 in some places. So it's really, that's probably too many, but you imagine several hundred at least were impacted. But they also note that in 1823, this route marked in yellow is the journey of the missionary William Ellis, who walked from Kilauea summit down to Kalakomo for the sunset there. And on the way, he stops at Kipuka Kahali'i and notes that there is sugarcane growing there, which is provided to him as a nice refreshing snack for this long walk down across the volcano. Right? And coming down to Kalakomo, there is a well-established village in that area. Right? And so what this article is saying is, it's interesting to note that when a volcano erupts or explodes, these big ash deposits, the ash is thickest nearest the summit, but it's actually present all the way to the coast. It's not as obvious down there. Sometimes it's not covering everything. But what it might do is it might fill the gaps between lava flows. So you might have a bit of a flow, and then you might have an area full of ash in between them. And it turns out that our lava flows don't break down very quickly. Right? They will in the presence of the tropical rain and all of that. But it still takes many, many years. And having ash fall down gives you the seed of a soil that you can then plant and farm. So we know that Hawaiian culture was very oriented to the ocean. So clearly there's a lot of fishing going on here at Kalakomo. But to really have that healthy settlement, they are suggesting that that presence of ash in this further area allowed it to be better farmed, and that could sustain a better village. And so in that case, having explosions of Kilauea were a good thing, that it created soil for these inhabitants not too far away. Excuse me. So that is Volcano Watch this week. It's more than that, but I just highlighted that little bit of it just to share a little bit of how the volcano really influences not just the landscape itself, but also the cultural aspects of it as well, right? Where people plant food, where they settle, who they think is in the right because the natural spirits were on their side, that kind of thing. So that was Volcano Watch this week. And with that, we do have some community points to note, and I will review what's been happening in a national park because that has been dynamic. So back on the 21st, the day of earthquakes, the park expanded its closures to close Chain of Craters Road, as I mentioned before. And reopened it the following day here on the 22nd. Also, they have nesting nene up at Uikahuna, and they have closed part of the Jagger Museum parking lot and a trail that leads from that parking lot back towards Kilauea Overlook to the east, which is the area where I would often go walking to see the lava lake. So that's because breeding pair of nene have laid eggs, and this normally lasts about a month. And so they just close the whole area off to any people to let this endangered species have the best chance to actually hatch its young and raise its young. So they do note here, last year, a different nene pair nested near the western end of Uikahuna, and that prompted a 5-week closure of the entire parking lot, restrooms, and overlook to protect the family. This year, the restrooms are still open, and that western part of the parking lot and the trail are still open as well, at least for now. So that was that third notice of closure in the last 2 weeks from the park. And for good measure, the park put out another holiday advisory because this is the busiest season for travel in Hawaii. And even without an eruption, you can expect there to be full parking lots and traffic. And as we've mentioned, there's less parking because of the nene. So that is the situation in the park. And they're just hoping everyone has a good time. And they can do that respectfully by being aware of what the limitations are in the park here at this point. So that is the unexpected from the park. And so at present, to summarize it, Uikahuna has closures. The desert areas are still closed, Mauna Iki and Ka'u Desert Trails, because of the earthquakes in the Southwest Rift. The Hilinapali Road is closed past Mauna Iki Trailhead. That is due to severe wildfire risk. And Mauna Loa Trail remains closed above Red Hill Cabin. Right? Remember, Mauna Loa Summit Cabin has reopened from the Western Trail from Ainapul, but the actual National Park Trail is still closed. So always check every single day. You never know what the park has going on if you're planning to come and visit during the holidays here. One last thing happening tomorrow in Pahoa Ho'olaulea, at the Pahoa High and Intermediate School. Normally, this is not something we need to promote, but we know that Dane will be there tomorrow with a table. So since we're present, come and check us out. Check Dane out. I can't make it, unfortunately, tomorrow to the Pahoa Ho'olaulea.
I'm bringing a rock collection with me to talk about. That's basically going to be the highlight of the table, is the rock collection.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Come see Dane's rock collection.
Super exciting, guys. Super.
Well, tell them where you got your rocks.
They're 2018 rocks from various eruptive sites around here, including the main one that's always interesting is the andesite from Fissure 17, since that's the first time Kilauea on record has erupted that kind of material exactly to the surface. So it's kind of unique in that front, and it is, when compared to all the other rocks, it is unique looking, right? It just looks different when you look at it with your naked eyes. So even for the layman, right, somebody that doesn't know what they're talking about, like, oh yeah, this is much different. So go through some of that stuff.
Yeah, so check out Dane's rock collection tomorrow. And that's it, Dane. I'm ready to pass it to you to say mahalos.
Yeah, well, appreciate everybody that tuned in today. I'd like to thank our new interpreters who's going to be switching out here momentarily. Rachel, thank you for joining us for your first run on here. Hope it wasn't too overwhelming for you. And then Dano as well. We'd also like to thank Lou, who hopped in for a moment to help with alleviate the situation when we had a little bit of an issue there. But really, we want to thank the viewers. Without people like you, we don't have an advertising budget. So to drive the algorithm, we rely on the donations and the shares and the likes and all the subscriptions and all of that stuff, because it really does help. All right. It really does help, and we do take donations. This is a 501c3 nonprofit now, so we have our donations are tax deductible, and those we take on the hvari.org/donate right there. Right. So yeah, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Maybe take a quick question or two. We've gone over already, so just if that's all right with you. There's one just essentially I want. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. We took a week off, and I lost my power there. Otherwise, I was trying to not go so long, but lead the way.
Nicholas asks, what would an Upper East Rift Zone eruption look like if it were to go?
Well, that's a good question. Most of them are short. So the most recent Upper East Rift eruption, when was that? You have to think it was, so I mean, when the Pu'o activity began in 83, there was some precursor stuff in the Upper East Rift Zone also. But kind of before that, some good examples might be Hiaka Crater in 72, Pauahi in those, and a similar time.
Something
74,
along those lines.
There was Luamanu. All those eruptions were, I want to say, hours long. Maybe the longest might have been 6 hours or 8 hours, something like that. But they were all adjustments of the ground that occurred, and magma kind of leaked out, and not for very long. And it did a lot of work in that time. We'll put it that way, right? So, in fact, in the paper on the Kauai Fault Zone by Don Swanson and others, the reason they differentiate between calling that the Upper East Rift and the East Rift Connector is because one of the things is this character of not erupting very often, and when it does, not erupting very much. Right? If you look at the map of Kilauea, let's see if I can get my Google Earth back on here. And zoom in a little bit. Now you can see what's green and what's brown here, right? There's the vegetation line, more or less, in there. And so all this stuff's growing pretty well in here. And there are flows you can see cutting through. There's a July 74 one right there. But overall, it's actually not that eruptive recently, right? There's not really any other area you can see through here compared to, let's look at Mauna Ulu, right? Or Pu'o'o, right? It's just a whole different thing there. So it's hard to say, but I'd imagine it'd probably be pretty short, localized fissures producing curtains of fire, maybe not lasting long enough to actually become a single vent, right? So that's the typical sequence we saw on, like in September, we saw a long fissure. It focused into just an area where a few of the fissures kept going on for longer. They built up big cones or features around themselves. You expect that to happen a little bit, but if you only have 4 or 6 or 8 hours, then they only get so big, right? And they don't end up focusing into one spot. What is really cool about those East Rift Zone eruptions is there's a lot of craters near there. So there's a fairly good chance lava flows into a crater and makes a little lava pond, little lava lake in there, like fed from above. And some of the most spectacular pictures we have of Kilauea's eruptions are of those lava falls into the craters in areas like this. Mauna Ulu, which was not exactly in Upper East Rift, is more around a corner, but there were craters there. Mauna Ulu completely filled and buried two of its craters. You can't see them on a map anymore unless you look for the features that are now hills over where those craters used to be. So
yeah,
that's what I can say for Upper East Rift eruption. It could be interesting. You probably imagine smoke, burning forest, craters filling with lava, not lasting very long.
Do one more, maybe quick one. If nobody has already asked, does Moku Veo Veo have a straightforward English translation? And I did look this up. National Parks was saying island of lurid burning is the translation. Yeah. That was I was like, and then I had to Google lurid exactly. What do you mean by using this term here? But yeah, that's the translation. We are now at about an hour and coming up on an hour and 40 minutes. Again, just to remind everybody, this isn't our normal streaming time. We normally stream 5 p.m. on Thursdays, Hawaii Standard Time. And that's just our standard update. We'd only moved this one just because of holidays and fitting the schedules together. So we appreciate everybody that tuned in today. We appreciate our ASL interpreters. We appreciate everybody that tuned in. And Phil, thanks for working through the issues and getting back online and giving us the update.
I made it back. I almost didn't make it back, but I made it back.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for your patience. Thanks for support, as Dane said. Thanks to Dano and Rachel, also from me. Mahalo, you guys. And until next week, Thursday, our usual time, unless she pops up before then with something that requires us to come online, we will see you on Thursday. Anything else, Dane?
Oh, I think that's it. Check out the Two Pineapples monitoring stream for conversation if you want to in between now and then, and also the Hawaii Tracker Facebook. If you're on Facebook, the Facebook group is really where a lot of stuff gets done and shared and broadcast, so definitely check that out.
All right, you guys, mahalo. Thanks for spending your Friday night with us if you're watching us live, and if not, then thanks for watching us when you have the time. Until next week, from the Hawaiian Volcano Education and Resilience Institute, he is Dane DuPont. I am Philip Ong. Aloha, everybody.